Good afternoon. My name's Christopher Allen, and I hope you all are excited about the promise of the blockchain and distributed ledger technologies and all these cool things that we're going to be showing you today. But I also want to very specifically dive maybe a little bit deep in this area of identity, because there are also some perils that we need to, in our designs, mitigate. So what are the perils and promises of identity on the internet? So my background, I've been involved in cryptographic trust for a very long time. I enabled PGP, if you know that, over 25 years ago. I worked with David Chaum at DigiCash, which is a very early pioneer in digital currencies in the early 90s. Licensed the technology that allowed for the first commerce server from Red Hat, and one of the consequences of all this work is that I'm the co-author of SSL 3.0 reference implementation, and I led the effort at the IETF for TLS 1.0. What does that mean? Every time you see HTTPS for a secure connection, I'm the person who co-authored that standard. I later became CTO of Certicom, did some very early smart contracts work. We basically got stopped by a lot of the patents and other limitations that were less technology than they were the way our IP system works. A lot of those patents expired by 2008, and that's one of the reasons why Bitcoin has been very successful. Bitcoin itself had very little new individual bits of technology. All of it was very mature, but he put it together, Satoshi put it together in new ways that were very, very powerful, and combined with a situation where it couldn't be stopped through patents and other things enabled the success that it's been today. Today, I'm the blockchain principal architect at Blockstream, which is a major blockchain company. I'm also board of advisors for ID 2020, which is a conference on digital identity that was held at the United Nations in May. And then I also host Rebooting Web of Trust, which is a many developer-oriented blockchain companies want to solve these identity problems. Let's get together and make it happen. So a little bit about Blockstream. Blockstream believes in trustless and permissionless innovation. We talk about trust in some of the previous slides. In some ways, what we want is something where trust is not required. So it's a hard concept to get into sometimes. It doesn't mean that we don't have trust, it's just we don't need trust. Open Source Elements project is an example of this. It's basically a fork of Bitcoin that allows for something called side chains. In particular, we have a side chain coming out right now called Liquid, which allows for capital efficiency and liquidity on Bitcoin exchanges. So right now, you have to, if you are doing currency speculation, you have to have assets and capital in multiple exchanges. This would allow you to rapidly move that and lower your capital requirements. As a company, we believe in fairness, openness, accountability. We want many interoperable markets. We want many blockchains. We really are building trustable and secure fiduciary transactions for all of these types of blockchains. So in this way, we're in it all together. We're committed to collaborating with the broader industry, where we work with BigChainDB, we work with Ethereum, we work with everybody. And we are very open to learning from you. However, Blockstream does not have an identity product. We have privacy and confidentiality capabilities. We have confidential transactions, these really powerful new tools called zero-knowledge proofs. We can do different kinds of crypto blinding. And part of the reason why we don't have a product, and part of the reason why I'm here, is that identity on the blockchain is a two-edged sword. And we want to be very careful about it. At best, we hold the accountable for their actions. At worst, we weaponize identity as a tool against the powerless. This is really, really important, and we need to solve it, or at least begin to address it now. So I'm here because we wish to be part of a growing dialogue together about what does identity mean on the blockchain. Because if we do not speak, solutions will emerge that don't meet the standards that we need to have. So let's work together on creating appropriate solutions. So why now? Why this instant is this important? Well, among one things has to do with the United Nations. United Nations Goal 16.9 targets that by 2030, all people on Earth will have access to a legal identity. Currently today, 1.5 billion people do not have any legal identity at all. 230 million children under 5 years. You know, we're seeing incidences of people being trafficked across borders in Southeast Asia because there's no way to prove that that child isn't your child. In addition, there are over 60 million stateless people and refugees. So these are people where the states no longer exist. They've been taken over by another country. They've been forced out of their country. Another example of a problem is the Aadhaar card. So the good news is that close to 1 billion people have been registered in India to allow them to have access to government services. However, the bad news is that it violates some of the best practices that we've learned in the Western world about how identity should be protected. They don't have laws against profiling, discrimination, abuse by law enforcement. The technology does not allow that in and of itself. So we're beginning to see abuses in India that in some ways it's too late. They've got 1 billion of these registered. In particular, they have a lot of biometric abuses. You can't revoke a fingerprint. And in Europe, we have a long history of knowing why this is important. Because in World War II, more Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, undesirables died as a percentage of population in Holland, which had the best civil service. They had the best civil service administration during the Depression. They helped their citizens better than almost any other country in Europe. But when Germany invaded, the first thing they went for was those records. They went to the temples and stole all the church records, and they used that to do the Holocaust. So what we want, what we desire, is to use the same tools to protect the buyers and sellers, traders, auctioneers of information, but we also want to do that around identity. We want a fair and transparent marketplace, and we want to defend those who have less power. Another reason why this is important now is GDPR is coming up fast. So by 2030, we have a lot of new requirements of what we have to have around privacy and consent. In particular, any data on identified or identifiable natural persons, including reversible pseudonymous data. It's not even just good enough that you don't keep the name around anymore. If somebody can puzzle through and correlate and do some thumbprints of different things to correlate it to a natural person, that's vulnerable. All of that data must also be collected with consent. A clear and affirmative consent, no defaults, specific and unambiguous. The data has to be available to all the subjects. It needs to be free to them. It needs to be correctable. And it needs to be reversible, i.e. the right to be forgotten. In addition, subjects have the right to port the data for themselves. I need to be able to get all the information that any one of you has collected, take it back into my possession, and then be able to use it with the new service. This is regulation that is law now, okay? It comes into effect in 2018. The penalties for this are huge. Fines up to $20 million up to 4% of worldwide profits. So this isn't just a European problem. All the companies around the world that do business in Europe also have to address these things. So As a possible way of looking at how to solve this type of problem, we've been turning around what it means to be sovereign, and in particular, self-sovereign. Every human on Earth has an identity. The UN actually says that this supersedes any state saying you have an identity. Everybody on Earth is entitled to an identity. But identity is not an administrative mechanism for others to control. Nobody should charge rent for you to be in existence. Everybody ought to be able to be the root of their own identity and central to its administration. Thus, the roles of names, citizenship, licenses, and credentials should be distinct as claims offered by their issuers rather than being identity itself. So it's a kind of a twist on the way we've been thinking about identity, and there are a lot of consequences for this. So to help companies and organizations and governments understand how this might work, we've created 10 principles that we would like to encourage organizations to consider in their designs. One second. So first off is existence. So users have an independent existence. I am here, and I am more than my digital existence out there. As more and more of this information about me comes in the world, there's still going to be me here in this world that is not digital. We have to accept that there is more to identity than just what we can capture in a digital form. Everybody needs to be able to control their identity and the level of celebrity or privacy as they prefer. You know, someone who is transsexual who's traveling through the Arab world needs to be able to have the privacy of their sexual identity when they pass through areas that are problematic. Users need to be able to choose. Users need to have access to all of their data. We need to avoid gatekeepers. Nothing needs to be hidden to the user. We need to hide it from others, but not to the user themselves. To do this, we need systems and algorithms that are open, that are transparent, and we need those to be persistent because identities are for a long time. They need to be as long as the user wishes to use them, and potentially users may have multiple digital identities, and they may decide to retire some of them over time. We have this in the real world. In the United States, when you turn 18, you have the right to be able to retire all of your identity information that was collected once you turn 18. We want this information to all be portable. Information and services about identity need to be able to go from one company to another company. We don't have great answers for a lot of these problems. So one of the things we need to be able to do is have this information be able to be to survive the death of a company or the death of or a change of regime or whatever. We need that portability. We want this to be interoperable. Scotland is a member of the Commonwealth. It is a member of the United Nations. This information ought to be able to be passed between these different countries and institutions, the multiple levels of our world, and especially as when we start talking about Brexit and sort of new ways of how companies and countries and people interact, we're going to be creating new layers of subsidiarity. You know, what is a city will be transformed in the next 10 years. We really want this to be used across wide classes and sizes and scales. It is very important that we have minimalization, which is the disclosure of claims about identity must be as minimized as possible, only that is necessary for doing the business. When I go into a bar and present that I am over 21, they do not need to know my birthday, they don't need to know my address, they don't need to know all of the other information, including the fingerprint that is biometrically on the back of my California driver's license. They only need to know I'm over 21. So we need to be able to offer that kind of capability. And finally, in some ways, in my opinion, the most important, the rights of individuals must be protected against the powerful. And I'm not talking about just the powerful in forms of government being powerful, but even against those who are more wealthy than someone else. If in the equation there is a balance required, where we are trying to allow for some wonderful capability like bringing up an example earlier about insurance, where like all of this information about somebody's property can allow them to lower their insurance rates. But if we basically discover that the consequence of that is equal to the harm potentially the user, because now somebody can find out that they've got a valuable musical instrument in their home and it can be more easily stolen. We have to weigh the consumer first. They have to come first, not necessarily the savings that it is to an insurance company. So I have a lot more details on all of these principles. This is only the beginning. I'm on Twitter at Christopher A. We are planning an update of these principles this year. The goal is an industry pledge. We would like to get all the companies that have been participating so far in self-sovereign identity, which includes consensus from Ethereum, Consent, my company Blockstream, Blockstack. I know the BigChainDB has been talking about it, as well as institutions like Deloitte and PwC, et cetera, to basically sign a pledge around a new version and update of these 10 principles. So I encourage that if you have some ideas here, are we missing something? For instance, something that was raised that isn't in this list had a lot to do about what is the cost here? How do we minimize the cost? Is there an 11th principle around minimizing costs and access to this that is separate from the individual things? Things like that we want to capture, and we want to capture them soon. Even if you are not a developer, you can go to this issues page in GitHub, and you can post your issues or questions or comments. Now, if you are a developer or have a development team and you are dealing with the problems of identity, we are creating some new architectures around self-sovereign identity. The main website is Web of Trust Info. We are doing biannual events. There's a GitHub, which has a wide variety of white papers, topic papers, et cetera, on this topic. And even beginning as of a month ago, we actually have something called a decentralized identifier, and somebody's done a sort of a portable reputation toolkit that handles some of these self-sovereign principles. It's very early. If any of you are familiar with kind of OpenID in the identity world, we're kind of like at OpenID 0.5. We still have to go through 1.0. We have to do the split to OAuth and 2.0 and FIDO and all the new things that have happened in the last 10 years. Will this all be ready by GDPR deadlines in 2018? I would say no. But it can solve a lot of things in GDPR that current technologies can't. So we need to start working on it, and these are places that you can participate.